Greetings, beloved Star Child Rising. You are in Christina's Corner, and I am Christina. Welcome back to the podcast where I have the opportunity and the honor to highlight and celebrate individuals who are out there leveraging their gifts and talents to make a positive impact on the world. Today, we're diving into the heart of authentic community connection with the remarkable Gemma Halfi. Gemma is a visionary educator who crafts experiential programs that empower individuals to navigate our complex world with empathy and a commitment to positive change. Her work, particularly her focus on the intersection of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and meaningful community engagement, is truly inspiring. Gemma champions the idea that engagement isn't just about volunteering, but about understanding the root causes of injustice and driving cultural shifts. She has specifically reframed her work to offer community engagement opportunities, which she calls CEOs, moving away from the term community service to foster deeper connections and a more equitable approach. Please join me in welcoming my dear friend, the insightful and amazing Gemma Halfi. Welcome, Gemma.
Thank you so much. It is so good to be here. I just love any time I get to spend with you, but I'm even more honored that you wanted me as a part of this wonderful series that you're doing.
Absolutely. How could I not? Based upon, the premise of this podcast and the work that, that you do and that I've witnessed firsthand as being on the front lines with you. Absolutely. So thank you for taking time. I know you're really busy taking time to have this conversation with me.
I'm honored.
So Gemma, I always start my podcast. First of all, I always have 6 questions,
Mhm.
and sometimes I double deck them, and I'll do that today, just so I can, get the most out of you. But the first one always starts back to the big beginning. Can you take us back to, your childhood, your upbringing? Was there anything there that sparked your interest in the work that you do now or that impacted it? Um, what was it like, you as a child?
Well, I'm the youngest of four girls, by far. My three older sisters are much older than me, and I came along much later as the happy accident slash surprise. And our parents were children of Italian immigrants, and they were raised in the New York City area with a very deep commitment to the value of community and the value of family and mutual concern and care for each other. And that was a really important part of my upbringing was my parents instilling in me a sense of purpose for caring for community. What's interesting as I look back on my childhood is that the way that my parents instilled that in me was very much from a perspective of charity, using the phrasing often, something like helping the less fortunate, helping the needy, which is a pretty common narrative, especially through a religious perspective, which my parents were very, very Catholic, very Italian Catholic. And that's not bad, right? It's not a bad thing to want to help people. However, that narrative that I was fed as a child very much put me in a perspective of the haves and the have-nots. So I really did have this strong foundation of wanting to serve my community, of having a purpose to to give back to my communities, but it was coming from a place of almost like spiritual gratification. At the time, I didn't know it. I just kind of felt like, oh, well, this is just being a good person. You just serve others. Um, and again, it's not wrong, it's not bad, but for me, it always felt a little off, and I never could put my finger on it. All of the community service hours that I did as a teenager, or the the times that I was serving through my church, it always just felt a little bit off, and I couldn't ever figure out why. But part of my upbringing was that after I finished college, I decided to go into a program that's much like the Peace Corps, but it's you just stay in the United States. It's an AmeriCorps program. And that for me was a huge piece of where I started to put the pieces together of what was feeling off for me. It really started to dawn on me that the way I was looking at serving others was very much almost self-serving. Um, I'm going to serve others because it makes me feel good and it makes me feel like I'm doing the right thing as a human. And again, it's not bad. It's wonderful to serve others, regardless of the motivation. And what I started to learn in that program was this is a much, much bigger system of injustice than, one person saying, I'm going to volunteer and then pat myself on the back. That if you are volunteering and not simultaneously examining the systems of injustice, nothing is ever going to change. And that was really where it dawned on me that it's the difference between, putting a Band-Aid on something or addressing a systemic medical issue, that you really need to address the systems at play that are creating the inequities in the first place. So it's interesting because my parents obviously gave me this wonderful gift of learning the value of community and mutual aid and wanting to care for the people in your immediate spheres, but they kind of did it in a way that didn't fit with me. And I had to learn that on my own. I had to kind of go out and figure out on my own what was missing from that puzzle of helping others that didn't quite feel right to me. And it ended up being this idea that if I'm not also looking at the core roots of the injustices of why things are so inequitable in our world, while I'm also doing that volunteer work or engaging with my community, that feels very empty to me. And that was what was always missing for me.
Wow, that was very powerful. Thank you for sharing, Gemma.
Yeah, thank
You
you for
make it
asking.
clear that, whatever we go through on our journey, we're clearly supposed to go through it in order to come out to be who we are
Yeah.
and to support us in the impact that we do make. So thank you for sharing that. That was great. All right, number two. This is already so good. And for you listeners, you got to know that me and Gemma have had so many of these type of conversations. I just love it that people have the opportunity to kind of peek in to hear how powerful your thinking is and transformative, and I love it. So thank you. All right, number two, you empathized the importance of examining the relationship between beliefs and actions and the difference between intent and impact. How does this concept intersect with equity, restorative practices, and your community engagement opportunities? And in your experience, what are some of the most common misconceptions or challenges people face when grappling with these concepts? And
Mhm.
how do you guide them?
I'm going to start with the second part first about the misconceptions, because I think that I need to share that before I go into the other piece of beliefs and actions. So I think the most common misconceptions are the misunderstanding about what equity is. I think most people just assume that it's either the same as equality, or if it's not the same as equality, it's bad. It's worse than equality. It's, that there's this kind of putting the term equality up on a pedestal, which would be wonderful if we were in a world where we all started from the same equal playing field. But we have to look at things through a lens of equity where everybody is given the resources that they need in order to thrive in whatever their environment, in whatever environment they're in. So I think that's one big misconception. I think another misconception is the concept of restorative practices. Many people have been hearing this phrase coming up so often in the past maybe 5 or 10 years. And I think there's a misconception about it as something that is very idealistic and um, kind of on a spiritual plane, almost metaphysical plane. And it really has nothing to do with that. It's really very much about human connection and the ways that we choose as humans to care for each other with mutual concern and with dignity and support and forming relationships so that when we come across trying times, we already have those solid relationships formed as a foundation from which we can work through the challenging times. And that's something that any community can implement. It could be a school, it could be a religious community, it could be a city or a town, or as grandiose as a country. If a country wanted to actually implement restorative practices, I sign me up for that country. Um, so those are probably two of the biggest misconceptions about the terms that you asked me about in the question. Back to the idea of beliefs and actions and the alignment of those things. So I believe, and in my work with teenagers, I often am asking them to think about how they envision the world as they want it to be. What is it that you see in the world that needs to be different in terms of how your vision of a better world, comes to fruition? So I ask them to envision what it is that they want to see, and then I ask them to think about where the world is now. And then there's this gap, right, in between those two things. So I see my role as an educator is to help them think about what are the very, very small things we can do to move that needle, even just a little tiny bit across that gap, because that's where you got to start. You have to just move it incrementally. But if you're not naming how you want the world to be, if you're not using, your radical imagination to figure out what is it that I want to get to, we're not going to get anywhere. We have to name where we want to go in order to even move that needle a little bit. Um, so I think that's really the important part of it is the idea of um, naming your values, naming where you want the world to be, and then figuring out what are the things that I can do to move that needle, to close that gap just a little bit.
Thank you. That was very deep. Um, Also, one of the things I wanted you to touch upon also is something that was really challenging for me in working with adults and doing the equity work is trying to bring across the difference between intent
Mm,
and impact. Can
yes.
you talk a little bit about that and how it pertains to the work that you do?
Yeah, thank you I'm glad that you circled back to that because I did kind of forget to address that part of the question. Um, when we one of the phrases we most often hear in diversity, equity, inclusion work is, I didn't mean it. When somebody says or does something that to another person felt like it was indignifying or it made them feel in some way like they didn't belong or it made them feel othered or small. When that is brought to the person's attention who said or did something, generally the first thing that is out of their mouth is, I didn't mean it. And that 9 times out of 10 is absolutely true, that the person did not mean it. I've been in situations where I did not mean to cause harm to somebody, to perpetuate, some form of marginalization. And I think that's one of the most challenging things to get somebody to understand that just because you didn't mean to do something, just because your intention was not to hurt someone, doesn't mean it still didn't hurt. And I think this is kind of where there's a connection between this concept of intent and impact and also implicit bias, where if we are not aware of our own implicit biases, we are much more likely to do things without intending to harm someone. And so it really all kind of connects together in equity work that we have to examine our implicit biases. And if you are someone who is very aware of your implicit biases and doing that work, bring people along in your spheres. Talk to people that you know about implicit bias. There's a lot of misconception about implicit bias in the world right now. It's getting a really bad name out there. But it's true. It's a real thing. You think about all of the messaging that you receive as a child over decades of being conditioned to think a certain way. And, before you know it, you're making assumptions about people before your brain has even, translated it to your mouth. It's a very quick psychological fact that we are making assumptions about people all the time. So with those assumptions, we are we are never really intending to hurt someone. That's the thing, is that we would love to believe that we are all good people, right? Like we want people to be happy. We want to, have a wonderful world. And yet, when we are not examining our biases and we're not taking responsibility for the impact that we have on somebody else, we're not changing anything. And it's one of the hardest things, I think, in equity work, to get to a place where you can say, I know that I didn't intend that, but I also want to take responsibility for the fact that it still caused some harm. It still caused hurt. It still perpetuated assumptions, marginalization, oppression. Um, and I need to take responsibility for that.
Yeah. It's so important that, we all do the work, including those of us knee deep into the work. It's the work is ever evolving, right? And it's important that we do the work. Otherwise, if you don't do the work, you get to a point where you're saying things like, get a thicker skin,
Mhm.
or gaslighting, and then you don't understand why everybody's mad,
Right.
and you may not have students around who are very savvy and will check you in a minute.
Yes, they
So it's
will.
important that we all have to continue to do the work. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
All right, next question. Um, Gemma, you often partner with teachers to co-create lessons that intersect with authentic community learning experiences and lesson plans. It's really exciting work, giving students the opportunity to learn about their community. Can you share an example of this type of collaboration, and how did it go?
Yeah, thank you for this question because it's one of the things I love talking about. Um, Two of the areas of social issues that I really love diving deeply into with students. One is food justice, and the other is refugee and immigrant justice. Those are two areas that I have spent a lot of time and energy and heart work in the past 10 years or so. And I've had the honor of being able to partner with teachers in the classroom to bring those real life experiences straight to a connection of their curriculum. And so, one example, before the pandemic, there was, there was a huge wave of Syrian immigrants from, 2013 all the way up to maybe 2018. Um, and we were seeing that on the news in, the Mediterranean area, but we were also seeing that here in the US, that many of the Syrian immigrants that were at UNHCR locations were being relocated to the US and other countries. And so we actually have here in our capital district of New York, we have a pretty wonderful and vibrant immigrant and refugee community. And that to me is a gift. It's an honor to be able to be in a situation where we can be the people that are welcoming our newcomers and our new neighbors. And one of the ways that I worked with a teacher, so one of my dear friends who is a history teacher here, was teaching a specific course about the history of the Middle East. And even though her content was very much, in antiquity and a lot of things that were happening, centuries and centuries ago, um, it's such a powerful lesson for students to see how even, from centuries ago, there is a direct connection to the way that societies are operating today. And the reasons why there is so much forced displacement due to violence and famine and climate and so many other reasons has this kind of direct connection to the past. So with the collaboration of my amazing friend and history teacher, she and I worked together to have her students, while they're learning about this specific geographic region, also do projects with some of our local refugee support organizations, some nonprofit orgs. We worked with one organization in particular that houses an after-school program for children from refugee families. We were able to spend time with them in their after school program. We actually threw a Halloween party for them and led some
Oh,
dances and baked some treats for them. And we did a coat drive, a winter coat drive, because so many of our newcomer neighbors are coming from places that don't typically have very harsh winters. And especially, when people were coming mostly from the Syrian and Middle East region, they're certainly not going to have winter coats with them, and they're coming to upstate New York. So that's a huge need in this area. So we did a winter coat drive. Um, and this was something we continued on a yearly basis. That's something that's really important to me, is that we're never just a one and done connection. We're always continuing and developing our connections with all the local organizations. So that's one example is working with the refugee organizations in the area. We also have really deep connections with local food pantries, food banks, community gardens, and bringing that kind of work to all different classes. What I love about this kind of work is that sometimes people will say, like, well, I'm a math teacher. That doesn't really pertain to me. Well, actually, it kind of does. I mean, there's so many ways that you can talk about statistics or, even in biology, you can talk about nutrition. You can talk about neuroscience and the way that hunger impacts somebody's ability to learn because of brain development. Um, but I did work in one situation. I worked with our one of our biology teachers, and we examined agricultural ethics and the idea of using pesticides and thinking about the ways that the land is typically, not used in a way that is regenerative. It's used in a way where it's extracted, which is a direct relationship to, capitalism and the way that things are really just extracted for gain. So we had our students visit some local farms, do some work at those farms, participate in our weekly food pantries nearby, just to get a better sense of what kinds of issues are there out there right now for families who are facing food insecurity. And it's always a really powerful moment to see the students make those connections between being out in the field, literally a field if they're at a farm, but in the field in their experiential moment and thinking, oh, yeah, this is what we talked about in class. And it kind of solves that problem where, like when you're in high school and you're in calculus class and you're like, when am I ever going to use this? Um,
right,
it like totally solves that problem
right.
because the students are out in the field and they're working with the children in the food pantry or the refugee center, and they see that the children are struggling to concentrate or they're struggling to be more socially connected, and they're thinking about how, all of these other factors, the trauma, the hunger, the ways that their parents are not present all the time because they have to be working, that there's all these different things that impact their psychological well-being, their physical well-being, and they can make these connections of this is what I'm learning in the classroom, and I'm actually, really getting hands-on experience in these opportunities. And for me as the educator in the situation, it's just an amazing moment for me because I think to myself, these are teenagers that I'm working with. They're going to leave this high school and they're going to go off and they're going to remember these opportunities and they're going to change the world. And that's awesome. And that makes me really excited.
Yeah. It's amazing for everybody involved, including the institution and, the educators and the students, The students are hungry. If we know nothing else about the students of today, they're hungry for different lenses to see and learn from different lenses and different perspectives. And um, the fact that the students take these experiences and want to go on your CEOs as opposed to some schools forcing them to get a certain amount of, community service hours.
Right.
These kids want to follow up.
Mhm.
And you get a line of educators who see the impact that these lessons have on their classes. You get a line of them outside your door. I saw it. Like, this is what I want to do. What can I, this is what I want to do. Gemma, help me, help me. What can I do?
Mhm.
So thank you for that.
Yeah.
I just love, your approach and the impact and that you're having on education. So thank you very much. All right. So now, Gemma, equity work and community engagement can be mentally, physically, and spiritually exhausting. I know you know where I'm going with this. We worked together for several years. How do you prioritize self-care and maintain your well-being while engaging in this demanding work?
I don't know if I have the right answer for that. It's not my strong suit, as you probably remember. But I'll name one of the biggest challenges for me in this, which is I think I fall into kind of a caregiver syndrome trap where I start to tell myself, I start to use a narrative of caring for others does bring me joy and does make me happy. And so that is self-care. And that's not untrue. But I tend to just rely on that. Well, what I'm doing is caring for others, and that is self-nourishing. So I'm good until I'm not. Um, so I think I'm trying, I think I've gotten much better at identifying when I'm falling into that trap of telling myself, no, I'm good, helping others and being engaged in the community is what feeds my soul. So I'm good. I don't need any more self-care. I'm catching myself with that more often now. And so that's one of the ways that I think I'm engaging in self-care is catching myself when I start to think that way and then giving myself the permission to just step back and do nothing. Just do nothing. Just be. Just sit outside and drink a cup of tea, or sit on my couch and read, or sit on my couch and close my eyes, or snuggle with my cat, or sing with my daughter, or um, just all of those little things that for somebody who is constantly in caregiving mode, whether it's, caregiving to the students at my school or caregiving to the community or caregiving to my daughter, it's kind of like a constant caring for others. Um, I need to step back and remind myself that isn't all what self-care is, that I also need to take some breaths. So I think that's really what it is really forcing myself to think about how doing nothing is doing something.
Yeah. And I'll also add that no one knows what you need for self-care better than ourselves, right? No one knows that. And so once you dive inward, you have an idea of what you need to self-care. I remember making the mistake a couple of years ago when it was coming up on your birthday, if you remember this. And it had been like, a tough couple of weeks. And your birthday was coming up. And I was all proud of myself, went into your office, and I said, Gemma, I'm going to need you to take your birthday off, like giving you that gift. And your face just dropped, like, but I want to spend my birthday here. And I could not, you remember that?
I do
I
remember
could
that.
not relate. Like, what? But, as we're ever evolving and we're learning and growing and getting to know each other, it was crystal clear that no one knows ourselves better than ourselves. And we just got to do and step up to the plate to do what we need to do in order to show up as our highest, best self,
Yeah.
every day to do what we came here to do. So thank you for that.
Thank you for
Um,
that, the reminder of that memory. That's very funny.
it was
I
funny.
want to be at work on my birthday.
I'll do another day. I promise I'll do another day. That was really funny. Okay, last question, Gemma. And hope we get to do this again. I'm sure we will find other topics to talk about. You've clearly dedicated your career to empowering people to become champions of positive change through meaningful community engagement opportunities, CEOs. What advice do you have for educators and community leaders who are looking to deepen their commitment to equity and social impact? And what gives you hope for the future of authentic community engagement and restorative practices?
Mhm. The advice that I have is to look in your own spheres of influence. Because right now, what is giving me hope is kind of going to both of your questions. What is giving me hope is the way that smaller spheres of communities are really coming together and working together to lift each other up. Um, I think that for educators and for community leaders, this goes back to the first question. I think I wish that I could share with the world, and maybe you're giving me this platform, so thank you. The realization that I had that community service is not just about going out and doing a good thing for other people and patting yourself on the back. Community engagement really is about thinking about the systemic issues, the the communities, based on identity, based on race, class, sexual orientation, gender, religion, um, immigration status, those communities, and the historical oppression that many communities have faced that have created an unequal playing field. Um, Nobody wants to think about that stuff. Not nobody. There's so many people who are thinking about that stuff. But if everyone who was going out and doing good work, good volunteer work, was also thinking about that stuff, we would be in a very different place right now. So my advice to community leaders and educators is do not engage in volunteer work and charity work if you are not simultaneously examining the systems of injustice that are creating these inequities in the first place. Um, it's fruitless. It's not going to go anywhere. It's putting a band-aid on something. And I very firmly believe that. I think anybody who says that they are invested in their community and wants to, quote unquote, give back You can't give back unless you're also examining the systems of injustice. I think there was a second part to your question too, and now I'm forgetting.
Um, I just, my apologies. I just realized that I skipped over one of my most important questions that I wanted to ask you. So I want to ask you that now.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, the question was about, I'm always about watershed moments. So what I wanted to ask you, and I'm glad we're kind of saving this for last, is can you share a watershed moment or two, it doesn't matter, in your life that significantly impacted your journey? You do everything that you do from the deepest cores of your soul. And so, is there a watershed moment that impacted you?
So many, but I'll narrow it down. Um, I mentioned earlier that in my early 20s, after I finished college, I joined the program called AmeriCorps. One of the assignments that I had in that program I was assigned at a Boys and Girls Club in the Oglala Sioux Reservation in South Dakota. And I was with a team of maybe 10 or 12 other AmeriCorps volunteers. We were all white, and we kind of, rode into the reservation on this big white van with, AmeriCorps plastered on the side. And at that point, I was still very much in the, like charity, do unto others mindset of community service. And I remember being shocked, absolutely shocked, when our van was vandalized and the place where we were staying was broken into and things were stolen. And there was graffiti on the vans, just very unwelcoming. Um, and that for me in the moment wasn't quite the watershed moment because in that moment I was like, what? How could this
Right.
happen? We're just here to do good. Um, and it was, in the years following that, in tremendous self-reflection and historical, self-education, where it was shocking to me that it didn't happen sooner. Actually, once we arrived on the reservation, um, it really became clear to me why that is so problematic to, like I said, just kind of like ride in on your white horse and have a white savior attitude, and not really understand the deep connections. And part of that, I don't blame myself completely for that. I think the system of AmeriCorps, it was a wonderful program. And I don't think it really got to the heart of like what I say now, that it wasn't having us explore the systemic inequities at the time. I consider myself really lucky and honored and privileged to be able to have had that experience. And then from there, reflect on those experiences from the perspective of where I am now. So that was certainly a watershed moment catalyst for me, was seeing our property vandalized on this reservation. Um, I would say another really important watershed moment for me is losing a very, very dear family member, my nephew, who passed away in 2020. He was only 22 years old, and he passed away from leukemia. And he was also my godson. And the reason why I mean, that's a watershed moment, I think, for anyone to lose somebody so young that you're so close to. For me, in particular, he and I had a very, very strong connection when it came to social justice and a sense of wanting to create positive world change. And I just remember that before he was diagnosed, he was in college and he played lacrosse at his college. And this was in 2019, 2018, right around the time of Colin Kaepernick taking a knee. And so on his lacrosse team, when they went and played their games, when the national anthem was playing, he would take a knee. And his coach encouraged him not to do that because it was going to cause trouble. His teammates asked him, don't do it. It's going to just, make waves. And he said, no, this is, we need to do this. We need to take a stand. We need to be on the right side of history. And, he wrote an article in his college paper about it. Um, and I remember he sent the article to me and he said, Aunt Gemma, what do you think about this? And I just was so proud of him. Um, and it was just something that he and I always had connected to each other about. He just was a world changer. It's, heartbreaking that he's not here changing the world right now, but in a way he is because he changed so many lives, including mine. And so that was a very, very impactful watershed moment was, the 22 years of the moment of having him in my life and then the moment of having to say goodbye to him, and really making a commitment to do and to be that change that I knew he wanted to be, had he still been here.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time. Um, I just I just so honor you and who you are. You think very deeply, you're introspective. You're never, ever, ever, I know this beyond a shadow of a doubt, going to be at a point where you have all the answers because you're always, always trying to go deep and ever evolve. And everybody around you knows that and loves you for that. So thank you for being you. And thank you so much for joining me. And we're going to have to do this again. Okay.
I'm so honored that you asked me to be a part of this. When I look at all the other amazing humans that you've been talking to, I am honored to be among that fabulous group. And so thank you for thinking of me and thank you for doing this good work of
Okay.
uplifting the stories
Absolutely.
of people who are
Thank
doing
you.
good work in the world.
And we'll continue to do it, continue to evolve. It's very important, especially in today's climate, as things that are going on right now. But for all of you listeners, thank you for joining in. Love and light to you. And we'll see you on the next podcast episode. Bye bye.